Well, folks, it's been a long ride. Honestly, probably one of the coolest rides I've been on, even with its ups and downs. But we finally come to the end of what everyone calls a hype train. If you've never been on a hype train before, then chances are you probably haven't been a gamer for very long. Because sometimes hype trains can go either direction. Sometimes they go high, sometimes they just stop and suck altogether. But with this one in particular, this one has been a very much long-awaited segment. Final Fantasy 15 will be releasing tomorrow. Or, in my case, probably later on tonight. I'm hoping it has a midnight release. But the point is, though, is that Final Fantasy 15 is right at our doorstep. And I guarantee you the majority of us is going to be playing it. So while we're waiting for the upcoming major event that many of us have been waiting for, we have to remind ourselves what Final Fantasy 15 was, what it was going for, and what it ended up being today. And I just wanted to kind of look back and just examine everything that we have seen thus far and kind of realize that 15 is its own right a clean slate. And I say clean slate because everyone in the gaming industry, fans, developers alike, anytime a game goes into a long overhaul of anticipation for a long time, like anytime longer than like 5 or so years, they go to where people call the Duke Nukem syndrome. Now, if record serves, Duke Nukem, or Duke Nukem Forever, was considered to be one of the worst games out there. It's not the absolute worst, but considering how long people waited for, it wasn't that good. And so people basically called it the Duke Nukem syndrome. So the question is, would Final Fantasy 15 fall into this category? Probably not. It, in its own right, is a much different detail of development. Let's turn the clock back and remember from what Final Fantasy 15 used to be called. It was technically called Final Fantasy Versus 13. This came out right after 13's release, I think. Of course, this was back before I got into E3 hardcore and actually watched it on the day. So this was sometime after the trailer was released in E3. But Final Fantasy Versus 13 trailer was by far a signal for what could potentially be the next game. Some of us kind of theorized that even though it was called Versus 13, that it had nothing to do with it. So we figured maybe the name might get changed or something. And really, in all honesty, that was basically a beta name. I mean, we might as well just say it was just a name that developers just gave it on, and they didn't know if it was going to be its next segment, if it was going to be a side story, or whatever. But Versus 13 has had quite a bit of development over the years. I think, compared to what it is now, I think Versus 13 had a much different direction than what 15 is today. Versus 13 had a much more, I wouldn't say darker tone, but the majority of the time that you saw it, it was definitely more city layout. It was more of interacting with two particular characters, Noctis and Lunafreya. These two particular characters were more of a mystery as it was, because during development, it kind of gave this signal that Lunafreya was something bigger. Like, there was something between her and Noctis. And of course, none of us really knew what it was. None of us really knew any detail. The fact was, there was not much information given. And it was kind of like on the realm of just, what's going to happen? No one knows. And I think the story would have turned out a lot different had it continued the road that it went. And even gameplay-wise, the gameplay-wise that it had, it definitely was a major step for the PlayStation 3 console. And it was somewhat similar to what we have now, but I think in deeper detail, the development stage that it was going for, it wasn't intended for basically a road trip. It was basically starting out immediately. It was more of like, it kind of reminded me like trying to overtake the kingdom or whatever, because it looked like you were going through the town and you were completing missions throughout the city and trying to defend it, I suppose, is what I was seeing. But for some reason or another, the development was going through, and rumors was going like wildfire. Very crazy, in fact. Just one moment, they were saying that it was going to be released for the PlayStation 3. Next moment, it was saying it's for a PSP. And at the time, PlayStation Go. And then when PSV came out, people speculated that it was going to be for the PlayStation Vita. And then there was like one or two rumors saying that Japan already had it. But I never saw anything of it. So it was like, maybe that's just a fake rumor. And then, all of a sudden, it dropped. At one point in development, Versus 13 practically got canceled. And I really don't know in terms of like development stage where they at during that point. But when they got to that point of where they were like, they didn't like what was going on, they didn't like the direction, and then they just dropped it. That was kind of sad for me when I found that out, when I heard that it might have been canceled. It really disappointed me, because that one trailer alone had me going for such a long time. A very long time. And it just kept grabbing me over and over and over again. It's just like every so often when I forget about it, it'll pull me back and be like, hey, forgot me? It's like, no, I haven't forgot you. When are you coming out? And it's like every single time that I remembered it, I always had to look it up to see if it was still being worked on, or when it was going to be released, or if it was even going to be a game. And it kind of disappoints me that sometimes potential games that look like they would be amazing ends up being canceled. So it's like, I've seen this happen so many times, and that's kind of like why I don't go into E3, because anytime an early in development game comes up, it can be canceled at any point. You never know what can happen. Sometimes the development stage can go so well, and then all of a sudden everything just goes falling to pieces, and then they're like, there's nothing we can do. Just give up. And it's sad, but these things happen. They are, after all, a company. They have to keep making new titles all the time. And anytime an idea goes sour, they just have to drop it, or just hold off. Which I think Versus 13 got hold off and not really canceled. I think they just dropped everything into like an envelope or like some form of a safe or something like that in order to keep it safe, and then if they feel like, okay, let's go back to this and see what we can come up with now. I think that was what they actually did. They didn't actually cancel it, they just more or less put it in a safe place to where they can pick it up later. And I think that's what they ended up doing. Because years later, at, what year was it? I think 2013 was the year. If I'm not mistaken. 2013, it had to have been 13. Because that was when Kingdom Hearts 3 got confirmed to be development. But that was a very exciting year for me. I'll never forget too, I was basically just doing my normal thing and everything like that. And all of a sudden, my younger brother pulls me. He says, I got a reason for you to get a PlayStation 4. Because at the time, I was like, I didn't care much for the new console that was coming out. At the time, of course, and that changed later on, but at the time I was like, you know what, the consoles these days, they're not looking good. They're turning to absolute shit, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to stop at the PlayStation 3 and just go retro collecting. Sure enough, Delmar pulls me over to see the new games that were being in development. And the first one that was shown by, I think it was, it had to have been him, Tetsuki Nomura. He was showing off 2 titles. And at the time I saw the trailer, I was like, Versus 13, they're getting back on it. Awesome. And then at the end of the trailer, it was confirmed to be Final Fantasy 15. It had its own name. Which, that made me even more happy, because there was no sense of having it Versus 13, because it had nothing to deal with 13. But at the same time, you know, it was definitely something. It was definitely one of the greatest moments that everybody was. Whenever everybody was watching that, I guarantee you everybody was just so hyped up, because 2 games got announced to be in development, full-fledgedly, hardcore in fact. And that was 15 and then Kingdom Hearts 3. So everyone was just blown away. Everyone's mind was just basically exploded at that point. And then, of course, from there, development for 15 kept getting better and better, to a point where we actually got demos. You know, we got Episode Dusea, and then we had the Platinum demo. In Episode Dusea, the development was a lot different than what we've got now for the Platinum demo. And honestly, I like the gameplay style that they have now than what they had with Episode Dusea. Episode Dusea, in my opinion, it basically showed gameplay ideal. Like, the general ideal of gameplay. And then the Platinum demo was like, here's what it's actually going to be. And honestly, I like it that way better. Because on the one hand, you are actually performing spells, you are changing out weapons, but you're not having to change out weapons in mid-combo. You're using them in a solid state, actually. Because the way that Episode Dusea had it, it was that based on your combo or attack pattern or whatever, your weapon would be used. So like if you were using a simple attack, it would be a dagger. Heavy attack would be like the Buster Sword. Jump attack would be like the lance or spear, so on and so forth. Basically, the combo moves would vary differently depending on how you adjust them. And the way they had it adjusted, I think what they were trying to do was to make it more like that he was more of a weapon master and he can change out weapons from time to time. But honestly, that one, to me, that one was a little bit more complex. Because on the one hand, it sounds interesting, but at the same time, it's not really grasping. But what we have today, the gameplay style is a lot better in my opinion. Like, you can actually see it clearly that this time around, they actually knew what they wanted to do and how they were going to do it. Honestly, when you think about the early developments of Final Fantasy 15, and by early developments, I mean after they had the name change, it definitely had a bigger change too. Like, I guarantee you, it changed dramatically in between those 3 years. And they thought to themselves, as like, I don't like how the characters are looking, I don't like how the gameplay mechanics are looking, can we make it look a little bit better? And what they have is way better, in my opinion. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. One of the characters that I ended up actually, like, maying to, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I absolutely love this character. King Reigns. His character went through like a very long period of just character design after character design. It went from like a normal like business looking man to all of a sudden a king who has basically he looks more like an actual ragged king. And that's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's more of a good thing because see, here's something that most people don't think whenever they go into like royalty and stuff like that. They think, oh, royalty people, they're there for power, they're there for ultimate glory, they're there for the fame, fortune, stuff like that. That's not always the case. Older traditional kings had their roles, and their major roles was protecting their people of the kingdom. It's a very big responsibility when you think about it. It's much like a president, except a little bit better. Especially today's case, should I say. But point is that the king's responsibility was to protect his people. And that's a very big responsibility when you consider you got like thousands, probably even millions of people that you have to protect from the outside realm. But then you also have another responsibility. Being more of a husband and a father. You have to think that that particular king has a family inside that castle. And for one reason or another, things might have happened that made things a little bit more, less per se, not all that glamour. And throughout watching both the movie and the anime series, you can clearly see that Noctis and his father had like a close relationship even though they were barely together at all. And I say barely together because King Reigns, being king, he had to literally be a king first and foremost. He was trying to protect his kingdom from this war that has been brought up. The Empire basically was trying to gain power, and the king was only holding them off from the main city itself. And based on that assumption, King Reigns became more of not just a king, but a worn-out one that has been through so much, and he's trying to keep things together. But he can only keep it out for so long, to a point where he could eventually just end up losing everything that he holds dear. So he tries to prioritize himself of what he has to keep. But for him, it's impossible, because that is a decision that he can never make. Because on one hand, he has to protect his people, but he also has to protect his son. So it's like, if he chooses one or the other, he'll end up losing everything in the process. And the way his character design looks today, I like better. I really do like it. It's so much more interesting, so much more advanced, and you get so interested in him. You do. In his character development before, you just saw him and you were like, I guess. This time, absolutely wonderful. And there are so many other greatly detailed changes that they have done. And for the most part, they've all been really, really good. So, basically, I know what you're going to be asking me. Well, all that said and done, what are you looking forward to in 15, and what are you more or less afraid of 15? And my biggest excitement are the weapons. For the longest time, whenever I see 15, I think of Noctis only have the certain set weapons. You know, you got your sword, the dagger, the axe, the spear, lance, halberd, buster sword, and I was like, okay, so these are going to be the basic weapons, right? That wasn't until the Platinum Demo came out, and word got out that there were these 2 secret weapons that could be attained if you got, like, what was it, 500 crystals? I want to say it's 500 crystals. I don't remember. It's been a while, but basically, if you collected those crystals, and during the battle sequence with the armor giant, if you were to warp yourself to the top of the building and landed on this platform, there were these 2 question blocks where if you got to them, they would give you 2 different weapon sets. The sword and shield, and the shuriken. The sword and shield wasn't too awful bad, but the shuriken, I was like, endless possibilities right there. My mind just clicked, and it was like, wait a minute. So I decided to go and invest. They have so much more weapon ideals to give Noctis, and it's like, I cannot wait to get them. You know, it's just knowing that you can have twin daggers, knowing that you can have a hammer probably, knowing the fact that you can wield a gun. Like, I thought Noctis wasn't wielding a gun, but then all of a sudden trailers later, I see him wielding a gun. And it's like, he literally is a weapons expert. He can wield any weapon he chooses. And that's exciting. Because that means the gameplay, if it ever gets stales out throughout, like, probably within the first 10 or so hours, probably, you'll probably get to an experimental state where you're like, well, let's try this weapon out, and you're going to end up liking that one better. And then the fact that gathering materials for, like, your spells, fire, blizzard, and thunder, fusing them together to create, like, a grenade-type spell, and making different powers and stuff like that, it's very interesting. And I'm like, this is very deeply invested now. It's just, they had like a clear idea of what they were looking for. They have it put together, and it's just so, it's so vastly interesting. And I'm looking forward to every moment of it. I think the biggest thing that I'm afraid of for this game right now is that because of it, that it's going to be having DLC and stuff like that, that the main game might not be that big. Like, I'm afraid the main game won't be big at all. That was until I heard a friend of mine tell me, because he decided to purchase through the digital download, right? And he looked at it, and he said, dude, you're not going to believe how many gigs Final Fantasy 15 is. I was like, how many? 50 gigs. At that point, I'm like, I'm happy. Because it's going to be over 100 hours of gameplay. So obviously there's going to be a lot of quests, there's going to be a lot of different items, there's going to be a lot of different stuff to go for, and I'm just looking forward to every moment of it. And the best part is, they've kept, like, the realm of both worlds of Final Fantasy. They kept a bunch of the old stuff that we know, from either weapons, from spells, to even the monsters. The majority of the monsters are there. And while Moogle may not be there, you do have him as a decoy, which I think is pretty funny, actually. I think so, anyway. And then you got a bunch of new stuff, new gameplay ideals, new ways to do stuff. And it's just, overall, I know it's not going to be the best Final Fantasy game. By no means, no. I think honestly, I don't think nothing can replace 7 and 10 to me. Because Final Fantasy 7 was my very favorite Final Fantasy game in terms of, like, completion rate. And Final Fantasy 10 was, like, the very first Final Fantasy game that I've ever played. And so it's like, there's really no other reason for me to have 15 above those two. And I mean, I've played a lot of Final Fantasy games. I haven't played all of them, but I played a lot of different ones. You know, I played like 7, 8, 9, Dres of Cerberus, Crisis Core, 10, 10, 2, 12, 13, 13, 2, Lightning Returns, Type 0. I mean, it's just... I know for a fact that 15 isn't going to be the top. But it's going to be lined up close to 10 and 7. And whatever gameplay, whatever happens in 15, in my personal opinion, I think it's going to be an amazing experience. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, what about turn-based combat? Or what about the old style Final Fantasy? I don't think they would get rid of that altogether. But I do think Final Fantasy now is going into a direction that people are more or less wondering, is this going to be something that is going to be from now on feature? Or is this just going to be 15? For all we know, it could be 15. For all we know, it could be for the next installment. But right now, 15 is what I am looking forward to most. And that's what's all that matters to me right now. That the game that started as first as 13 almost got cancelled, but has come back and it's now being released. That's what makes me excited the most. Is that a game that almost got cancelled is still going and then is fixing to be released. It's been a long road, but I wouldn't change it for the world. So, let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you excited for 15? Are you looking forward to it? Do you have your doubts? Are you going to wait until you hear like proper reviews from other people and stuff like that? Whatever decision you have, whatever reason it might be, I understand completely. But until then, this gamer right here is going to be having a thrilled day of his life with 15. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And hope you enjoy Final Fantasy 15 experience as much as I will. Catch you later.